Is free speech under threat? Is the First Amendment under threat?
Absolutely. I think since the beginning of this second Trump administration, the president and his advisors have taken a number of steps to use sort of every lever of power at their disposal to control the speech of private individuals, private companies, and private institutions. And I think the Brendan Carr's statements on Wednesday is just the latest example of this administration using threats of regulatory oversight, denial of mergers, and things like that to essentially coerce private companies into censoring speech that the administration doesn't like.
So what is the recourse here? You have a long history of working in this field. You were one of the litigators, the lead litigator on that landmark case back in the first Trump administration where the president blocked people on his social media account, the real Donald Trump Twitter account. So you have a lot of experience with this. What is the recourse here?
Well, the recourse typically, and certainly over many decades of our history, is to sue in the courts under the First Amendment and to challenge government action that violates the First Amendment. And that is important both for the speakers that are affected by government censorship, but also important for everybody else to, for the courts to confirm that the First Amendment protects all kinds of speech, including speech that many people, or even most people, find very offensive. And it also protects speech on broadcast stations, on cable news, on social media, etc. And so what the main step to get relief here, other than public opinion and political change, obviously, is to get courts to rule that this is unconstitutional, and it plainly is. The problem
Huh.
is that at least we've seen in the Trump administration, a number of private institutions and companies, even if they have a very strong First Amendment claim, essentially folding and caving before actually litigating or vindicating their rights.
So wait, so then when you look at this, and let's roll on top of this. I mean, Walt Disney taking Jimmy Kimmel live off the air indefinitely. It was said amid a backlash to remarks that he made about the killing of Republican activist Charlie Kirk. So amid a backlash. And then the move was really brought about by Nexstar Media Group, which owns dozens of ABC TV affiliates, saying it would pull the show from its stations over remarks that were, quote, offensive and insensitive. So when we think about free speech, does Jimmy Kimmel have the right to say what he was doing, that it was within the parameters of what free speech is? Does Nexstar Media, if there's a backlash of people who also have free speech right to say, we didn't like this, have the ability to say that? Does Nexstar Media have the right to say, we run a business and we want to change what we carry, or maybe not? Like, help me understand free speech in all its, wonderment, if you will, but in also maybe how it's a little tough to kind of figure out what it exactly is.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely complex. I mean, the First Amendment only applies to actions by the government, meaning the government cannot censor speech, but, private companies, private institutions, private individuals can suppress speech or, decide that they don't want to speak in certain ways if they don't want to. That's absolutely fine. But I also think it's important to see the context here, which is that yes, this affiliates or these local broadcast stations said they weren't going to carry the Jimmy Kimmel show, but they also said that after the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission made a statement that said, called on Disney and ABC to take action against Kimmel, or else the FCC was going to look into whether these broadcast licensees were broadcasting in the public interest. So that's a direct threat of government censorship. So while, ABC could make its own decision, but I think there's a real concern here and direct evidence that the government is using the threat of regulatory investigations and possibly, by the way, these local broadcasters are seeking approval by the FCC of a potential merger. And so, I think you can connect the dots and see that the FCC chairman's statements played a significant role here. Even if we don't know for sure, it certainly raises the troubling specter that the government is using threats to coerce private speech, and that is unconstitutional.
So what about like a news organization or an entity like Disney, ABC, who also has a fiduciary responsibility? I know that this may not be your area, but a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders that if there are deals that don't happen and things don't happen, it changes their financial picture. And I guess I'm just trying to understand that, do they have a right to say, well, this isn't in the best interests of the company? And so even if it's kind of, dampens somebody's free speech or removes it, do they have a right? Yeah,
well,
I know that's a
they
lot.
may have a right, but is it? No, they might have a right, but is that the long-term best way to go? Is that in the long-term best interest of the company? I mean, if you're going to have companies constantly bowing to pressures from the government, censorship pressures, including, you just saw the president, or you played the clip of the president saying on Air Force One, I think you should revoke the licenses anytime a broadcaster carries a show that criticizes me, is essentially what he's saying. Long term, I think that is not in the best interest of broadcasters that want to air programs that the entire country watches. And, presumably these broadcasters, and certainly Disney and ABC, have many viewers that are upset about Jimmy Kimmel being suspended based on, a pushback from the Trump administration.
So how do you view this as going through the courts? Like, does Jimmy Kimmel have a case here? Does somebody have a case here that they could bring to the court that could ultimately go to the Supreme Court and be a test for the First Amendment of the Constitution?
I think it could be. Just last year, in a case involving the National Rifle Association, so certainly not an entity on the left, brought a lawsuit against a New York regulator saying that the regulator had brought pressure onto insurance companies not to cover the NRA. And the NRA brought a lawsuit, and the Supreme Court said, if that regulator uses its authority to pressure other, banks or insurers not to do business with the NRA, that violates the first, based on viewpoint, that violates the First Amendment. So under that case, I think Jimmy Kimmel could bring a lawsuit against the government saying Brendan Carr and the Trump administration sought to exert pressure and through threats of coercion. And then the result was that ABC canceled or suspended the show. There are some complexities in terms of the remedy that he could seek, but I think at the very least, you could ask for a declaration and an injunction saying the government can't do this. So it wouldn't be a lawsuit against ABC, it would be a lawsuit against the government.
That's what I'm thinking, right, Tim?
Yeah, that's
this would be his own lawsuit, though, without the backing of his network.
I'm just wondering, or if somebody else brings it on.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. Okay, we could get into, that is sort of what I was thinking, and that I think he would have a good claim. But of course, it's complex. There are questions about remedy. And I think, overhanging this is of whether it would eventually reach the Supreme Court is all the sort of other financial considerations that are motivating the various actors that are involved in this issue.
I'm curious about the non-legal implications of this, and just in your view as somebody who focuses on the freedom of the press, what the implications are of an administration that seems to target negative news about him, news that's critical. For example, the president this week sued the New York Times for $15 billion, claiming it has an agenda against him. Last year, Disney paid $15 million to settle a defamation lawsuit that was brought on by President Donald Trump over comments made by host George Stephanopoulos. What is the effect of that? Not the legal ramifications, but the effect of that, just in your view, on a free press?
I think it's deeply scary. And adding to the examples you gave, also the FCC's actions against CBS and the ultimate settlement over 60 Minutes airing, a particular edited version of its interview with Kamala Harris. So I think the message that it sends to journalists and to media companies is if you criticize the president or his administration, you do so at great risk. And that should be frightening to all of us, and including should be frightening to people on the left, because if we accept that that's how these things should proceed, then if there's a Democratic president in power, that person could use, the same kind of threats and coercion against Fox News or right-wing media entities. And we would all be the poorer for it, and from a free speech perspective.
Last question. All right, so everybody in media is listening and paying attention. But what about American citizens more broadly? I mean, free speech is just something we take for granted, right? And gold standard, if you will, I think, around the world. What could be, should we be worried that it's not just about media? It's about everybody in terms of what they say.
Absolutely. I do think we are the gold standard, and for good reason, or we have been. But, I've been practicing First Amendment law for a long time, and I've never seen such a frontal assault on basic First Amendment principles, things that I thought were well established and things that we all benefit from. And so right now it's being, waged against, members of the media. But we also see the Trump administration essentially taking all these steps to decide for the American people what their colleges can teach, what their media, what their favorite comedians can say. And, I think that can be used just increasingly to crack down on free speech. And we should all be very concerned about that.
Katie, yes or no? Does this potentially, the issue of free speech, First Amendment, go all the way up to the Supreme Court at some point? Yes or no?
I think it will at some point.